Get my six. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to Homesteading Off the Grid. I'm doing quite well. A lot of folks have been wanting follow up to my current condition. We are 15 days past day one of me becoming symptomatic. We're 11 or 12 days after I tested positive. My voice still sounds a little rough, but I believe that's just because I'm really coming out of this thing. I had been down. I've been struggled with exhaustion there for about a week or so. Got a bit of the sniffles still, but I'm feeling great. I didn't run today. I've run the last 3 days. I did split wood for about an hour and a half today. And if I don't run out of daylight before the time I tell you this story, I'm going to split a little bit more with the gas-powered log splitter. I'm not, being too physical. Which I can't wait to do, though, with my 10-pound sledgehammer and my diamond maul. I love doing that, but I'm allowing myself to recover at a nice controlled pace. I don't want to push myself too hard and then relapse back into illness. So, with all this said, I couldn't help but think today of this whole concept of science versus faith. Because I've been going over the comments on the video that I made there about a week and a half or so ago when my wife and I tested positive. And it seems to be an us versus them. If you ain't for us, you're against us, that kind of thing. And I already made a video about stopping the hate. There's some really vile people out there who are actually hoping the worst case scenarios for folks who have made different decisions than they have throughout this pandemic. So I'm not going to go back and address that. But what I'm going to address in this video with this really creepy story is this concept of science versus religion or faith, or what maybe some highly educated intellectual types might even go as far as to call superstition. Which one should we believe? Which one should we follow? Because my question to you is this: why not both? Why not both? If we believe in an almighty, a great creator, who is it then that would create the world's best doctors and best scientists who have allowed us to get to the point to where we are, to have the most advanced technologies, treatments, and medicinal practices of modern man? At least we think. And now comes our story. This is going back about 30 years. When I went to college, I actually majored in science education. I'd been brought up in a split religious household. One parent was a Roman Catholic, the other was a Bible-beaten Baptist. I've never had any good taste for religion in my mouth, though I've always felt a strong connection with God. I know that my experience, what I went through with religion, as it were, had nothing to do with God as much as it did man, and two parents that love to pit each other off against themselves and their children off against the children. And so why not, what better way to do that than make one go to mass on Saturday and, church service on Sunday and grow up completely and totally confused, right? So never had a good taste for organized religion. I heard it said once that God came down and gave man spirituality, something I've always been close to, spirituality. And then the devil came along afterwards and said, here, let's organize this and we'll call it religion. So anyway, by the time I'd gotten to college, I was majoring in science education. I came to know a man who we're going to call Dr. J for the purposes of this story, who was quite an enigma. You see, he had a PhD in chemistry. He was a professor. He had been a hands-on scientist that actually worked in the lab before going into academia. But he was one of the most spiritual men I've ever met. He was very active in a church. He was a Protestant. I believe he was a Baptist. I might be wrong. Might have been Episcopalian, but he was not a Catholic. He was definitely a Christian, and he was of one of the Protestant sects. And this struck me as an enigma. I struggled in chemistry. I did really well in biology, the earth sciences. Chemistry was tough for me, and I think it was because of a lot of the advanced mathematics. For instance, if you've ever tried to determine moles, figure out moles, M-O-L-S, just look up that formula, Google it. I struggle with it. So I would go to Dr. J's office to ask for help often because I needed it. And I would see his Bible. His Bible would jump out at me before any of the textbooks. He was a very practical man. I used to go in and I used to ask for extra credit. Hey, can I write an essay on one of my strengths, whatever, pick it, because once I wrote, I could write about anything and it would come off really great because as it would turn out, writing would be what I would go into as a career. That would be my future, not so much science. But he would never allow me to do that. He was very practical and pragmatic. He said, if you have time for extra work to increase your grade, then you obviously have more time that you could put on your primary work so that you wouldn't need the extra credit. And it made sense, right? So I really came to respect this man. And I had him, maybe not every semester, but at least every other semester there for several years. And then going into my senior year, we went to a large radio observatory in Green Bank, West by God, Virginia. The Green Bank Radio Astronomy Observatory. We spent a week there. It was a summer class. And we got to meet some members of a group called SETI, S-E-T-I, and that stands for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. I think at one point Carl Sagan was in charge of SETI or involved heavily with SETI. I heard lectures from those guys that blew my mind, absolutely blew my mind. I left that week convinced we are not alone in this vast universe. I don't have the answers. They didn't in particularly, but they just talked about the likelihood, the probability. Numbers really don't lie. Numbers mean something. And but there was this one scientist, can't even remember his name. He came off as a very pompous, arrogant, intellectual, elitist type. And as someone sitting in that room, again, who never had a good taste for religion in my mouth, but certainly never, ever at any point in my life doubted the existence of a great creator, a higher power. I was turned off by this guy's lecture because it wasn't so much about science as it was bashing people of faith. He used the word ignorance a lot. He talked about a lack of education. I don't think ignorance was as much the issue of what he was doing there that day as much as his arrogance was the issue. He was one of these that maybe he's commented in the comment section of my coronavirus video, you know, if you don't think just like me and see things just like me, I hope a worst case scenario for you. I mean, that was this guy's mentality. He was only a few minutes into his little spiel when I realized Dr. J got up and left the room. He didn't even sit in there to listen to it. And this, again, was a man of science, PhD holder, former chemist, actual scientist, and now working in academia. So at the end of the day, after dinner, there was a lounge type room where we would go. And I remember watching the Red Green Show. Who's ever heard of that? Raise your hand. A few folks have commented off and on that some of my more entertaining videos kind of remind them of that show. I think it was a Canadian show. Mr. Red Green, whatever his name was a Canadian. It was humorous and it was clean. I like that. So I consider that a compliment. I think you can be funny without being vulgar. It's kind of a lost art. Well, you tell me you didn't hear that mysterious creature screaming from the forest. Anyway, keep getting my 6. You never know what may or may not show up back there. I approached Dr. J that evening and I asked him, I said, what did you think of that presentation? I saw you obviously didn't think much of it because you got up and left the room. And he says, you know, I've known that man for years. I have requested he please don't do that because if there's any students in there who have strong faith, who are, you know, maybe religious or at least spiritual, that's going to be a turnoff. And you're never going to convince people to see your side of the story by insulting them. That's just a fact that so many grown-ups, supposed grown-ups out there just don't get. Hey, maybe if I insult you enough and tell you how ignorant you are, you'll come around to see things my way. Doesn't work. So anyway, I saw this as an opportunity to ask Dr. J a little more about himself. And I did. And I said, I am curious. I have an inquiring mind that wants to know, how can someone such as yourself, who is so educated, you're as educated, as highly educated as that man in there, that arrogant, pompous doofus that was, making sure to say all these nasty things to and about people of faith, but yet you still are a man very solid in your faith. And I knew by this point, you attend church every Sunday. He goes on Wednesday nights. Again, you see his Bible in the classroom as much as you'd see his textbooks. I said, how do the two go together? Because we seem to live in a world where you're not allowed to believe in one and the other. And he smiled and he said, he says, you were one of only 2 or 3 students I'd had in the 20 or 30 years that he had been teaching at the time who have ever asked me that question. And I would love to give you the answer. I said, I'm all ears. And he then proceeded to tell me one of the most amazing stories I've ever heard in my life. And the ending wasn't quite the ending I expected. The ending itself sent chills down my spine and put goosebumps across the entirety of my flesh. As it turned out, Dr. J, like many college students, when he had been a college student, hadn't originally majored in science. He had majored in archaeology. He wanted to be an archaeologist. And this guy, I don't even know if he's still alive. I should have Googled him based upon his real name. If he were to be alive today, he would have to be 80. He would be 80 if he's still among the living. So you figure he was born roughly 1940. So he would have been in college in the early 60s. When he was in college, he actually got to go on an archaeological dig in Egypt as an observer. He was there sort of like what do they call them? The assistants that like a lot of times, especially at the big universities like UVA, you don't even see the main professor. He or she's out trying to get published and get in the modern science articles or whatever so that they can increase their tenure at the university. TA, teacher's assistant. They have teacher's assistants actually teach the class. So he was kind of working the position of a TA, teacher's assistant, on this archaeological dig for one of his professors that was in Egypt doing the dig. They were going through some old tombs, some old ruins that had been hacked into by marauders over the previous couple of 100 years. They weren't finding a lot of stuff that hadn't already been found. He was talking about how disgraceful it was that common thieves would go in there and unravel the mummies, the folks who had been mummified, looking for any sort of jewelry and whatnot they could get to sell at pennies on the dollar just to get a quick, easy money. But they happened to find within a ruin that had been ravaged by marauders a doorway in the back that had been hidden when part of the ceiling had given way and fallen. They removed the rocks out of curiosity. They were looking to see if they could maybe find any of the jewelry the marauders over the last couple of centuries may have overlooked or left behind. And in removing these stones, they found another door. And they were ecstatic to find that this cave, small burial site, had not been violated. They were able to remove the stone. They went in and they found mummified, in a tomb, an untouched mummy. He said it appeared to be the cacophonous of a young woman, maybe a teenage girl or a young woman, and there were 4 coffins, mummified coffins that were shaped like hyenas, but with like monkey arms or gorilla arms. So it's like they looked like hyenas, but their front arms were those of gorillas, even down to the paws. So there was some writing on the coffin of the mummified young woman or teenage girl. There were people there that specialized in the hieroglyphics or whatever the language was, they were able to translate it to modern English. And it said something to the effect of, she shall not be disturbed. He who disturbs her shall be savagely ripped to shreds by her guards. Something to that effect. And so they all looked around and they're thinking, what are these the guards inside these golden mummified coffins or whatnot? Are there actual hyenas or whatever with gorilla arms? And is this the threat? So they painstakingly moved all of their findings out into a secured location where they could do their experiments. So they opened the case. They unwrapped this young lady. They put her approximate age at about 20. They did find jewelry. She had been mummified and buried with many artifacts, namely her jewelry, necklaces, bracelets. She had been well preserved. There was no existing flesh. This had all been gone, but the skeleton structure was pretty much intact. And now, he didn't touch anything. He's taking notes as a teacher's assistant. His professor secured all the findings, the jewelry, the artifacts, as they do it in, Ziploc bags, airtight bags, whatever, and they were donating them all to a museum. When they were finished, they put her back in the tomb, back in the coffin, and they put her back in the room where they had found her, as well as the coffins of the hyenas that looked as if they had gorilla arms, and they sealed the door shut. Now, he mentioned that they had opened those, and they were empty. They were as empty as could be. There weren't even any ashes, no dust. It's almost as if it was a veiled threat and a superstition. There were no remains of any animals or anything else in those structures that looked like hyenas with gorilla's arms. So they were just within their last couple of weeks before they were going to leave this dig. And one night at 2 o'clock in the morning, Dr. J, when he was a 20-ish year old college student, woke to the sound of heinous screams sounding as if somebody was getting ripped to shreds. He ran out of his tent to find that there were other members within their group that were running directly towards the screams. It was the main tent where the professor was staying. He got there, Dr. J, when he got there, there was already a crowd of people. The screams had stopped. They were circled around what would inevitably end up being the professor, lying dead in his bed, torn to shreds. And out of the corner of Dr. J's eyes, he saw exiting through the side of a tent something that appeared to be dog-like, which was running like a dog, but at the same time throwing itself up with front arms like a gorilla. He caught just a glimpse of it for just a second, and the thing was gone. And then he went and he saw with the rest of the group that his professor was dead. He went back home. They wrote it off to a murder. Oh. Okay, I'm hearing footsteps behind me, but they're coming from back in this direction. So let me change the angle here. For those of you who have been following this channel for some time, you know at times these stories are so good, we get visitors that creep down behind us to hear them. So keep getting my 6. So the way they wrapped that up, because he still had the jewelry, all the artifacts they found in the bag, but it was found the next morning when the authorities came in that those things had gone missing. They were missing. They were nowhere around, nowhere in sight. So they pinned it on some local ragtag thieves, some guys who were known to be thieves. They imprisoned them, beat them. It's what life's like in other places outside of, advanced Western nations. Threw them in prison. It was about a month later, Dr. J got word that another group went into that burial site where the body of the girl had been found. They went in to do further investigation, They opened the coffin back up, and they saw that she had been wrapped back up. So they unwrapped her again, and on her, what had been her person, was every single piece of jewelry and artifact that had been taken from her in the previous excavation. The artifacts, which had been sealed in airtight bags and kept beside the professor, who would mysteriously be ripped to shreds, a quote-unquote crime they pinned on local thieves, men known to be local thieves. Yet, correct me if I'm wrong, thieves aren't known to steal only to replace the stolen items where they'd originally come from. So I looked at Dr. J after he told me that story, and I said, well, you know, that's an amazing story, and it really gave me the creeps. But this doesn't really explain to me how you ended up being such a man of science, and yet you remain to be such a man of faith. He said he changed his major because he didn't want to delve into any, he used the term hocus pocus, supernatural, black magic, superstition. So he went into science because he wanted to disprove that what he thought had taken place that night, and he never told me what he thought, but I think the story itself implies what he thought, what he felt. He wanted to prove through science that such things just couldn't be. Events like this couldn't happen. The things out here that people believe may or may not exist just simply couldn't exist. And I said, well, sir, what have your findings been after 30 years of being a scientific man? He said that it was his thirst for science which led him to God, to a higher power. Because the more he understood about science, the more he learned about science, the more he knew there was so much between heaven and earth that cannot be explained. And so I said, oh, I get it. So since science technically going past theories can't really explain how this all came to be, you know, the Big Bang Theory, evolution, these are all pretty good principles, but there's really no hard evidence to prove this, so you're convinced there must be a God. This is the part that's really creepy, because he says, not exactly. I said, then what exactly is it? I'm kind of missing a point here. He said, whatever did that to the professor that night was of the devil. It was of pure evil. He said, I am convinced there is a greater power out there, a God that he could not begin to explain, because there is, again, so much in science it can't be explained. But he said it was with his utmost ability to have faith. He prayed daily there was a God, because God is good. And the evils that he saw on that expedition in Egypt all those years ago were of the most heinous evil. And it was his hope for mankind, there is God and there is good, to offset such evil. I asked him how close to being convinced he was. He says, I'm getting there, but I'm not going to quit praying. With that, I wish each and every single one of you a good evening. Hope you're doing well. Take care of yourself. Remember, you could do worse than to just go outside and go for a walk or a jog and become active and get fit and exercise again. Help you get through all kinds of illnesses. See you for more next time.